If you don't think there are WMDs in Iraq, you are an idiot.
Across the country, editorial writers bought what Powell was selling. A masterful legal summary, a strong, credible, and persuasive case, a powerful case, an ironclad case, succinct and damning evidence, a detailed and convincing argument, an overwhelming case, a compelling case, a persuasive, detailed accumulation of information.
These were supposed to be the most discerning, sophisticated journalists in the country writing this stuff, and they were totally bamboozled.
And sure enough, in the newspapers, if you looked very hard inside in the next few days in the coverage, you could find really serious questions that were raised about this, but they were very much pushed aside.
This gets us right to the heart of the debate that's going on now in our craft. We lean heavily in reporting on what they say.
That's right.
We want no wider war. I'm not a crook. Mushroom cloud, weapons of mass destruction. We really give heavy weight to what public officials say.
Well, that's true, and we need to address that. In the end, it was, look, the president himself says these things are so. He stands before the Congress with the question of war and peace hanging in the balance and says these things. And there was a feeling, not just with myself, given all that, who am I to say, you know what, I think it's all a Machiavellian scheme to take us into Iraq.
Big news today in the cable world, Ellen. Phil Donahue, canceled by that other network.
22 days before the invasion, your show was canceled.
It should be said that we did fairly well in the ratings. We did not burn the town down. Nobody on MSNBC did. But we were certainly as good as anybody else on the network. And often, we led the network.
In dumping Donahue, NBC cited ratings, but a blogger got his hands on an internal memo and the press picked it up.
Yeah, that memo said Donahue presents a difficult public face for NBC in a time of war. At the same time, our competitors are waving the flag at every opportunity. Did you know about that memo at the time?
No. I didn't know about that till I read about it in the New York Times.
What did you think? What does that say to you? That dissent is unpatriotic?
Well, not only unpatriotic, but it's not good for business.
Tonight, the case for war.
Showdown Iraq with Wolf Blitzer.
I think these executives were terrified of being called soft on terrorism. They absolutely knew that the winds were blowing at hurricane force politically and socially in the United States. And rather than stand up for journalism, they just blew with the wind. And Dan Rather and others who say, yeah, you know, I was carried away back then. Well, sure, that's when it matters. When it matters most is when you can make a difference as a journalist.
Fear is in every newsroom in the country. And fear of what? Well, it's the fear, it's a combination of, if you don't go along to get along, you're going to get the reputation of being a troublemaker. There's also the fear that, you know, particularly in networks, they become huge international conglomerates. They have big needs, legislative needs, regulatory needs in Washington. Nobody has to send you a memo to tell you that that's the case. You know. And that puts a seed in your mind of, well, if you stick your neck out, if you take the risk of going against the grain with your reporting, is anybody going to back you up?
The media just continued on this path of reporting, well, the Bush administration alleges that there are WMD, and never really stopped and said, it doesn't look like there are. There's no evidence. That should have been the second sentence in any story about the allegations of WMD. The second sentence should have been, but they did not present any evidence to back this up.
You know, we're sending young men and women, and nowadays not so young men and women, to risk their lives, and everyone wants to be behind them, and everyone should be behind them. The question for us in journalism is are we really behind them when we fail to do our jobs? Is that really the kind of support that they deserve, or are we really, in the long run, serving them better by asking these hard questions about what we've asked them to do?
Good morning. Shock and awe.
Operation Iraqi Freedom. Reports of secret surrender talks as U.S. bombs hit Baghdad.
This CBS News special report is part of our continuing coverage of America at War.
4 years after shock and awe, the press has yet to come to terms with its role in enabling the Bush administration to go to war on false pretenses. Peter Beinart is almost alone in admitting he was mistaken.
Where I think I was tragically wrong was not to see in February, March 2003, after we got the inspectors back in on the ground, and we began to learn much more about what had been going on in Iraq than we had known in 2002 when we had no one on the ground, that assumption was being proven wrong.
You say tragically wrong.
Because I think the war has been a tragic disaster. I mean, the Americans killed, the Iraqis killed. It's true, life under Saddam was hell. But can one really say that life for Iraqis is better today?
We wanted to talk to some others in the media about their role in the run-up to the war. Judith Miller, who left the Times after becoming embroiled in a White House leak scandal, declined our request on legal grounds. The Times liberal hawk Thomas Friedman also said no. So did Bill Safire, who had predicted Iraq would now be leading the Arab world to democracy. President Bush recently awarded. The Washington Post's Charles Krauthammer also turned us down. So did Roger Ailes, the man in charge of Fox News. He declined because, an assistant told us, he's writing a book on how Fox has changed the face of American broadcasting and doesn't want to scoop himself. William Crystal led the march to Baghdad behind a battery of Washington microphones. He has not responded to any of our requests for an interview, but he still shows up on TV as an expert, most often on Fox News.
And he's got to begin to show progress in 3, 4, 5 months once the U.S. troops get in.
Being a pro-war pundit means never having to say you're sorry.
I mean, these were people who were laying out the blueprint for the war about how it was going to unfold, and it turns out couldn't have been more wrong every which way.
You have a president.
And it's astonishing to see them still on TV, invited on as experts in the region.
It's true. So many of the advocates and apologists for the war are still flourishing in the media. Bill Crystal and Peter Beinart, for example, are now regular contributors to Time magazine, which has been laying off dozens of reporters. And remember this brilliant line?
We cannot wait for the final proof, the smoking gun that could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
The man who came up with it was Michael Gerson, President Bush's top speechwriter. He has left the White House and been hired by the Washington Post as a columnist. The number of American troops killed in Iraq now exceeds the number of victims on 9/11. We have been fighting there longer than it took us to defeat the Nazis in World War II. The cost of the war are reckoned at $1 trillion and counting. The number of Iraqis killed, over 35,000 last year alone, is hard to pin down. The country is in chaos. That's our report. You can go to our website at pbs.org for an interactive media timeline tracking the coverage leading up to the invasion. Waiting online as I speak is that crack team of reporters from Knight Ridder, now reporting for the McClatchy Company, who are prepared to respond to your questions and comments. Remember, we'll be back every Friday night on most stations with interviews and analysis, beginning this week with Jon Stewart of The Daily Show. Meantime, you're the public in public television, and your support of this local station assures our independence. I'm Bill Moyers.